The office was an embodiment of wealth. Every corner of the space screamed success, gleaming glass windows that offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, expensive leather chairs, and walls adorned with art that only the richest could afford. The polished mahogany desk sat in the center, a symbol of power and influence. A large crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling, casting a soft glow over everything it touched. At the head of this room sat Gregory Stone, a man who had earned every bit of his wealth through hard work and ruthless business tactics. Gregory was not the kind of man who would ever be caught in casual clothing. His perfectly tailored suit, an expensive brand most people could only dream of, hugged his muscular frame. His polished shoes gleamed under the office lights, and his watch, a rare collectible, glittered as he tapped his fingers rhythmically on his desk. His face was a picture of determination and authority, framed by short, perfectly combed hair. Everything about him exuded success, and he was proud of it. He was used to being admired, envied, and respected. After all, he had built his empire from the ground up. But there was one thing that irritated him more than anything: people who couldn't keep up. People who couldn't live up to the high expectations he set, people who couldn't produce the results he demanded. Failure was not something Gregory tolerated, and in his eyes, the world was black and white. Either you succeeded or you didn't. There was no room for excuses. In the far corner of the office building, in a small, cramped cubicle surrounded by stacks of paperwork, sat Jordan Harris, the black employee who had been struggling to make ends meet. Unlike Gregory, Jordan's life wasn't bathed in luxury. His suit, though neat, was from a discount store, and his shoes were starting to show signs of wear. Every morning, Jordan woke up at the crack of dawn to catch the train to work. His days were long, spent in a whirlwind of emails, meetings, and never-ending tasks. Yet, no matter how hard he worked, it seemed that life was constantly pulling him back. Jordan's financial situation had been strained for months. The medical bills from his younger sister's illness had piled up, and his mother's constant health problems only added to the burden. At work, he was determined to keep his personal struggles hidden. No one needed to know about the sleepless nights he spent worrying about his family or the pressure of making ends meet. Despite his challenges, Jordan showed up every day on time and with a smile. His work ethic was undeniable. He stayed late, completed every project with precision, and always went the extra mile, hoping that his hard work would eventually pay off. But no matter how many hours he put in, how many tasks he accomplished, it never seemed enough. His boss, Gregory Stone, didn't notice the effort. Or if he did, it was never enough to earn him any kind of recognition. Gregory saw Jordan as just another employee, a cog in the machine. He didn't take the time to understand the personal battles Jordan was facing. To him, Jordan was just another person who wasn't performing at the level he expected. Empathy was not something Gregory had in abundance. He had built his wealth by making tough decisions, by not letting anyone stand in his way. And employees like Jordan, who couldn't keep up, simply didn't have a place in his world. In meetings, Gregory would glance over at Jordan's desk, eyes cold and critical. He had already made up his mind that if Jordan couldn't produce better results, he would be out. He didn't care about the personal circumstances or the struggles outside the office walls. To Gregory, that was irrelevant. Work was everything. Jordan could feel the tension. He knew he was on thin ice. He had tried everything, working longer hours, being more proactive, even trying to impress Gregory with innovative ideas. But each time, Gregory's cold indifference made him feel invisible. Despite the early mornings, the late nights, and the relentless pursuit of perfection, Jordan was beginning to question if he would ever make it. The distance between him and Gregory seemed too wide to bridge. It was a silent war, one that Jordan was losing, and the realization that he might never get a fair chance weighed heavily on him. But he was determined to keep going, even if the path ahead felt uncertain. Gregory, on the other hand, remained unaware of the storm brewing under the surface. To him, it was just business. and business was always about the bottom line. Jordan sat hunched over his desk, his eyes heavy from lack of sleep. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, almost mocking him as it ticked towards midnight. His fingers moved mechanically over the keyboard, typing one email after another, trying to meet the deadline that seemed to get closer with every passing minute. His phone vibrated quietly on the desk, a reminder that his younger sister's condition had worsened. Another hospital bill. She needed more treatments, and with every phone call, the burden of caring for his family became heavier. His thoughts wandered briefly, but he quickly refocused. He couldn't afford distractions. He'd already had a conversation with Gregory earlier in the week. The pressure to meet expectations was crushing, and the constant fear of falling short haunted him. There was no room for failure, not here. Not if he wanted to keep his job. Jordan had worked tirelessly to make sure everything was completed on time. He stayed after hours, pushed aside his own needs, and sacrificed what little personal time he had left. But as the weeks went by, the toll began to show. He could feel himself slipping, both physically and mentally. His once sharp focus was now clouded by exhaustion, his thoughts scattered. He reached for a cup of coffee, but the bitter taste only reminded him how much of his life had been consumed by his work. The exhaustion, both physical and emotional, had started to affect his performance. His mind would wander during meetings, and he found it harder to concentrate on the tasks at hand. He knew the quality of his work wasn't what it used to be, yet he kept pushing himself. What choice did he have? The phone rang again, jolting him out of his thoughts. It was his mother this time. "Jordan, your sister is asking for you." Her voice cracked on the other end. "She doesn't understand why you're not here." Jordan's stomach twisted with guilt, but he couldn't leave now. He had a report to finish, and Gregory was expecting it by morning. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'll be home soon, okay?" he said, trying to mask the strain in his voice. He hung up, feeling the weight of his family's struggles press against his chest. He knew he couldn't keep this up for much longer. Something had to give. The next day, the pressure didn't ease. The demands kept coming. Jordan had been assigned yet another project, one that required even more time and energy. His eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, but he didn't dare show weakness. He couldn't afford it. He arrived at the office early, hoping to get a head start on the day's work, but the moment he entered the building, he felt the weight of his exhaustion. Gregory, sitting in his pristine office, glanced up when Jordan passed by. His face was unreadable, but his gaze was sharp. Jordan wasn't sure if Gregory had noticed the bags under his eyes or the slight slump in his shoulders, but there was no acknowledgment of his struggles. Gregory's world was one of high standards and unyielding success. Weakness wasn't allowed. "Morning, Mr. Stone," Jordan said, offering a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Gregory barely looked up. "Morning," he said flatly. "I need that report by the end of the day, Harris. Don't be late." Jordan nodded, swallowing the frustration rising within him. Another deadline, another task. It felt like an endless cycle. But he couldn't stop now. He would keep pushing. He had to. Hours passed in a blur of emails, calls, and meetings. Jordan's hands shook as he typed, the words on the screen a blur. His mind was foggy, and the constant pressure was starting to crack his composure. But he refused to let it show. Around mid-afternoon, Gregory walked past Jordan's desk, his eyes briefly scanning the papers in front of him. He stopped for a moment, then scoffed. "Still working on that?" "I thought you were better than this, Harris," Gregory said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Don't let this drag on. I need results, not excuses." The words hit Jordan like a punch to the gut. He wanted to say something to defend himself, to explain how much he was struggling. But he bit his tongue. Gregory wasn't interested in his problems. The world of privilege and success that Gregory inhabited didn't allow for weakness. And Jordan knew that better than anyone. "Dot?" He nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course, Mr. Stone. I'll have it ready." As Gregory walked away, Jordan felt his heart sink. He didn't care. The mounting pressure, the long hours, the personal problems. It didn't matter to Gregory. He was just another employee to be discarded if he didn't meet the standard. The tension began to build, a gnawing feeling in Jordan's stomach that refused to go away. He kept working, his body and mind both screaming for rest, but he ignored them. The fear of failure loomed over him like a dark cloud. By the end of the week, the situation had only gotten worse. The report was late, and despite working through the night to finish it, the quality wasn't up to Gregory's standards. Jordan had made a few small mistakes, nothing major, but enough to be noticed. When Gregory called him into his office, Jordan's heart raced. He knew what was coming. "Sit down, Harris," Gregory said, his tone cold. "I'm disappointed in you. This isn't the level of work I expect. I thought you were capable of more, but you've let me down." Jordan's chest tightened. He had given everything he had. The long hours, the sleepless nights, the constant sacrifice, and it still wasn't enough. I'm sorry, Mr. Stone," Jordan stammered, trying to keep his voice steady. "I've been doing my best. I've been dealing with some personal issues, but I'm committed to this job." Gregory didn't respond immediately. He stared at Jordan for a moment, his expression unreadable. Finally he spoke. "Personal issues, huh? Well, maybe that's the problem. If you can't separate your personal life from your work, then maybe this job isn't for you." His words were blunt and final, the disappointment in his voice cutting deeper than any criticism. Jordan's face flushed with shame. He wanted to explain, to tell Gregory everything, but the words wouldn't come. All he could do was sit there in silence, feeling the weight of his boss's indifference. Gregory's gaze hardened. "I expect better from you, Harris. Get it together, or don't bother coming back." The ultimatum was clear. And with that, Jordan left the office, his heart heavy with the knowledge that no matter how hard he tried, he was never going to be enough in Gregory's eyes. It was a Friday morning when Jordan's world came crashing down. The clock on the wall ticked mercilessly as he reviewed the project he had worked tirelessly on for the last few weeks. It was supposed to be a big presentation, a project that could solidify his position at the company and prove to everyone, including Gregory, that he was capable of handling the pressure. But as Jordan flipped through the last few pages of the report, he felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. There was a glaring mistake, a critical error in the final calculations, one that could completely undermine the entire project. His hands trembled as he tried to fix the mistake. The deadline for submission was just an hour away, and no matter how hard he worked, the error refused to be corrected. His mind raced. How did I miss this? He had already been struggling to keep up with the demands of the job, and now this. His eyes blurred with exhaustion as he tried to fix the problem, but the more he worked, the more it seemed like a lost cause. With the deadline looming, Jordan's heart pounded in his chest. He took a deep breath, gathered his courage, and sent the report off, hoping the error would somehow go unnoticed. But deep down, he knew it was a mistake. A big mistake. As he walked into the conference room for the presentation, the weight of the situation hung heavily on his shoulders. He could already see the looks on the faces of his colleagues. Some of them were focused, others were whispering among themselves. Gregory was at the head of the table, flipping through his notes with his usual air of superiority. Jordan's throat felt dry as he stood in front of the room, his hands sweating. He began to speak, his voice shaking, as he presented the findings of the project. But as soon as he reached the part of the report with the error, he knew something was wrong. Gregory's sharp eyes caught the mistake instantly. He sat up straighter, glaring at the screen, then turned his gaze to Jordan. "What is this?" Gregory's voice was cold, cutting through the room like a knife. "How could you miss something so basic? This is completely unacceptable, Harris." Jordan's heart sank as the room went silent. His colleagues exchanged uneasy glances, and some even shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The weight of the criticism was unbearable. It felt like the ground beneath him was crumbling, but he couldn't let it show. Not now. This is supposed to be your big presentation, and you've completely messed it up. Gregory's voice was loud, his tone harsh. How many times have I told you to double-check your work? This is the kind of mistake that will cost us clients. It's unprofessional. Jordan swallowed hard, trying to maintain his composure. He could feel the heat rising in his face. The humiliation was almost too much to bear. Everyone was watching, waiting for his response, waiting to see how he would handle it. But the words wouldn't come. What could he say? Gregory didn't seem to care about his silence. I don't have time for mistakes like this. Get out of here, Harris. You're done for today. I'll take care of this myself. The words hit Jordan like a slap across the face. Done. That was it. No explanation, no second chances. Just a simple, final dismissal. With his head down, Jordan walked out of the conference room, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. How did everything go so wrong? Jordan sat at his desk long after everyone else had gone home. The office was empty, the soft hum of the lights above the only sound filling the room. His eyes were fixed on the screen in front of him, but the numbers blurred together. He couldn't focus. What's the point? His mind replayed the scene in the conference room over and over again. Gregory's words, the disappointment, the cold, uncaring look on his boss's face. It felt like everything he had worked for had been crushed in that moment. He closed his eyes, trying to stop the flood of emotions that threatened to overtake him. The humiliation, the frustration, the shame. But beneath all of it, there was something else, a flicker of determination. No, I can't give up. He had come too far to let this one mistake define him. There was still a chance, if he could just find a way to get back on his feet. He could fix this. He could prove Gregory wrong. But as Jordan sat there in the quiet of the office, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything was slipping through his fingers. The mounting pressure, the personal struggles, and now this catastrophic mistake. It was all starting to feel like too much. How much longer could he keep pretending everything was okay? The next day, Gregory's reaction was even colder. When Jordan arrived at work, he was immediately called into Gregory's office. "I need to talk to you, Harris," Gregory said, his tone blunt. "Yesterday was unacceptable. You failed to meet the standard, and frankly, I don't have time for someone who can't deliver." Jordan's stomach twisted as he stood there, trying to keep his emotions in check. This was it. He had worked so hard for this job, for this opportunity. But Gregory wasn't interested in his excuses. "I don't have time for this kind of behavior. You're a liability, Harris. Maybe it's time for you to consider whether this job is right for you," Gregory continued, his voice devoid of any empathy. Jordan felt a sharp pang in his chest. A liability? Was that all he was to Gregory? Just another cog in the machine to be replaced if he wasn't good enough? Gregory glanced at him one last time before dismissing him with a wave of his hand. "Get back to work. Don't disappoint me again." As Jordan walked out of the office, he felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. The tension between them had reached its breaking point. Gregory had made it clear that he was no longer interested in giving him a chance. But as the door closed behind him, Jordan took a deep breath. This wasn't the end. It couldn't be. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when Jordan was summoned to Gregory's office. His heart was already pounding as he walked down the long hallway, his footsteps echoing in the quiet building. He knew what was coming. He could feel it in his bones. After everything that had happened in the past few days, the tension between them had become unbearable. He had been trying so hard, pushing through personal struggles, late nights, and endless stress, but nothing had been enough. As he reached the door to Gregory's office, his mind raced. What do I even say? He didn't know if he could even bring himself to say goodbye to the job that had once seemed like his dream. The door opened with a soft click, and Gregory looked up from his desk. His cold gaze met Jordan's, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The silence was deafening. "Sit down, Harris." Jordan hesitated for a moment before taking the seat across from Gregory. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, but he tried to keep his expression neutral. This was it, the moment he had been dreading. Gregory didn't waste time. "I've given you more than enough chances, Jordan." He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him as he studied the younger man. "You've had your shot, but you're just not cut out for this job." Jordan's stomach dropped. This was really happening. He had known this moment was coming, but hearing the words out loud felt like a punch to the gut. Not cut out for this job. He had worked harder than anyone else in the office, fought through his struggles, and given it his all. But none of that seemed to matter now. "You're not performing at the level we need," Gregory continued, his tone dismissive. "The mistakes you've made recently, the missed deadlines, the constant excuses. It's clear to me that you can't keep up. You've had every opportunity to prove yourself, and you've failed." Jordan's hands clenched into fists as he tried to keep his emotions in check. The words stung, but he refused to let them break him. "I'm not going to cry in front of him. I'm not going to let him see how much this hurts." Gregory's eyes narrowed as he watched Jordan's reaction. He didn't seem to care about the man sitting across from him, the one who had worked tirelessly for this job. He didn't see Jordan as a person, just a failure. "I don't want to hear any more excuses. You're fired." Gregory's voice was firm, final. "You're free to go. I'll have HR take care of the paperwork." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Fired. The one word that had been hanging over Jordan's head for weeks. It was finally happening. Jordan sat there, stunned for a moment. His mind struggled to process the reality of the situation. This was the end of the road. He had been fired. But as the initial shock began to wear off, something inside him clicked. He had worked too hard to let this define him. He had struggled through too many challenges to just give up now. He wouldn't let Gregory's cold dismissal be the end of his story. Jordan stood up slowly, taking a deep breath as he looked Gregory in the eyes. His voice was calm, but there was a fire behind it that Gregory didn't expect. "You think this is the end of me?" Jordan's voice was steady but firm. "You think firing me is going to break me?" He took a step forward, his gaze unwavering. "I've faced worse in my life, and I'm not going to let this define who I am." Gregory's face remained impassive as he stared at Jordan, but for the first time there was a flicker of something. Maybe surprise, maybe confusion. He clearly hadn't expected this kind of response. He was used to seeing employees crumble, to watching them beg for another chance. But Jordan wasn't like the others. "You can fire me, but you can't take away everything I've worked for," Jordan continued, his voice gaining strength. "I'll bounce back. I'll find something better. I'm not going to let you or this job hold me down." There was a long silence between them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension in the room was palpable. Gregory's eyes flickered briefly to the door, as though he was ready for the conversation to be over. Jordan took a deep breath, trying to hold himself together. He could feel the weight of the moment. This was the hardest thing he had ever done, but it was also the most freeing. He was leaving this toxic environment behind, and there was nothing Gregory could do to stop him. "Goodbye, Mr. Walters." Jordan's voice was calm, but there was a quiet strength in his words. Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked toward the door. As he opened the door, he paused for a moment. He could feel the weight of Gregory's gaze on him, but he didn't look back. He stepped out of the office, holding his head high, his heart pounding in his chest. As Jordan left the office, the reality of what had just happened began to settle in. He had been fired. But instead of feeling defeated, he felt something else, a strange sense of relief. For the first time in months, he felt like he could breathe. He wasn't bound to this job anymore. He wasn't tied to Gregory's cold indifference. He could finally move on and find something better. Outside, the city was bustling with activity. Cars honked in the distance, people rushed by, and the world seemed to keep spinning. Life doesn't stop just because I've been fired, Jordan thought. The rejection stung, but it wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something new. He knew he had the skills, the drive, and the determination to succeed. And this wasn't the place where he would make it happen. He would find a better opportunity, one where his hard work would be appreciated. Inside Gregory's office, he sat back in his chair, feeling a sense of smug satisfaction. He had made the right decision, he thought. Firing Jordan had been inevitable. The young man had been struggling for far too long, and Gregory wasn't one to waste time on lost causes. In his mind, this was the cleanest solution. No more mistakes, no more stress. It was a relief, really. He had given Jordan more than enough chances, and he wasn't going to let his own company suffer because of one employee's shortcomings. He'll be fine, Gregory muttered to himself, already moving on to the next task. He'll figure it out. But deep down, Gregory knew he wasn't thinking about Jordan anymore. He had done what he needed to do, and that was all that mattered. After leaving Gregory's office, Jordan's initial shock wore off quickly. He knew he couldn't stay down for long. Despite the harsh dismissal, the fire inside him had been reignited. He walked out of the building with his head held high, determined to prove everyone wrong, even if they didn't believe in him. The next few weeks were difficult as Jordan faced the reality of starting over. He had no job, no steady income, and his savings were quickly dwindling. But instead of succumbing to despair, he took action. He spent long hours searching for new opportunities, networking, and refining his skills. He used the rejection from Gregory as motivation. Every no he received fueled him to work harder. One day, while scrolling through LinkedIn, Jordan saw a post that caught his eye. It was from a top competitor of Gregory's company, an organization that valued innovation, diversity, and hard work. The post advertised an opening for a project manager. Jordan wasted no time. He updated his resume, crafted a compelling cover letter, and submitted his application. He didn't know if he would get the job, but he knew he had to try. He didn't have the luxury of waiting for opportunities to come to him. He had to create his own. Days later, he received an email inviting him for an interview. He was nervous but determined. This could be his shot. The interview went better than Jordan had hoped. His confidence, sharpened by the challenges he had overcome, impressed the hiring manager. His experience, combined with the lessons he had learned from his struggles, made him stand out from other candidates. Within a week, Jordan was offered the job. It was the break he had been waiting for. Jordan threw himself into his new role with everything he had. He quickly proved that his dedication and hard work weren't just about getting by. They were the core of who he was. He spent late nights brainstorming ideas, refining processes, and motivating his team. The environment at his new company was completely different from the cold indifference of Gregory's office. Here he felt valued. His contributions were recognized, and his growth was supported. He started to climb the corporate ladder faster than he had ever imagined. His new colleagues noticed his resilience and drive. He wasn't just another employee, he was someone who took ownership of every project, someone who was committed to excellence. And as time went on, his efforts began to pay off. Jordan's success wasn't immediate, but it was steady. Each small victory led to a larger one. He turned around struggling projects, introduced innovative solutions, and earned the trust of upper management. His hard work didn't just speak for itself, it shouted. Over time, Jordan became a key player in the company. He was given more responsibility, and his influence grew. His story of perseverance became an inspiration to others in the company. Jordan's trajectory was nothing short of extraordinary, and he soon found himself in a leadership role, overseeing projects and managing a team of his own. But it wasn't just about professional success for Jordan. His personal life began to improve as well. With a stable job, he was able to fix his financial situation and address the personal struggles that had once weighed him down. The sense of relief was palpable. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was thriving. He often thought back to those dark days after being fired. The rejection had stung, but it had also sparked something in him. It had given him the drive to push beyond his limits, to prove to himself and to everyone who doubted him that he was capable of achieving greatness. Months passed, and Jordan's name began to spread throughout the industry. As he rose through the ranks at his new company, he started to gain recognition for his accomplishments. He was invited to speak at conferences, featured in industry publications, and even received awards for his innovative work. One day, while browsing through LinkedIn, Gregory's eyes landed on a familiar name, Jordan Harris. He was shocked to see that Jordan had been promoted to a senior leadership position at one of their top competitors. The news hit Gregory like a ton of bricks. How had this happened? Gregory thought to himself. I fired him. I wrote him off as someone who couldn't cut it. Gregory couldn't believe it. He had dismissed Jordan as a failure, someone who didn't have what it took to succeed. But now here he was, rising through the ranks of a competing company, earning accolades, and becoming a force to be reckoned with in the industry. For a moment, Gregory sat back in his chair, stunned. His mind raced. Could I have been wrong? He thought. Was Jordan really someone with potential? The more he thought about it, the more the doubt gnawed at him. Had I made a mistake? Gregory wondered. Had I let go of someone who could have been an asset to the company? Gregory's pride, his belief in his own infallibility, was slowly starting to crack. He had always prided himself on making tough decisions, on separating the winners from the losers. But this felt different. Jordan's success made Gregory question everything he thought he knew. As weeks turned into months, Gregory continued to hear about Jordan's success. He saw posts about him on social media. He heard from colleagues about the impressive projects Jordan was leading and the accolades he was receiving. It was clear Jordan wasn't just surviving, he was thriving, and it was happening right before Gregory's eyes. One evening, as Gregory sat in his office, he glanced over at a photo of his employees hanging on the wall. He'd had it taken years ago when he was still surrounded by people he'd carefully handpicked. His gaze lingered on Jordan's smiling face in the picture. What if I had been wrong? For the first time, Gregory started to feel a sense of regret. I let go of someone who could have been an asset. He realized that his cold, ruthless decision to fire Jordan had been based on assumptions and surface-level judgments. He had never taken the time to truly understand the person behind the employee. Jordan's success was undeniable. As he looked back at everything he had overcome, his struggles, his doubts, and the cold dismissal from his former boss, he knew that it was all worth it. He had proven not just to Gregory, but to himself that he was capable of achieving great things. As he stood on the stage at an industry awards ceremony, holding a trophy in his hand, Jordan thought about the long journey that had brought him here. He wasn't the same person who had walked out of Gregory's office months ago. He was stronger, more resilient, and more confident in his abilities than ever before. Jordan had turned the setback into a stepping stone, and he had built a future that no one could take away from him. Jordan's journey is one of transformation, resilience, and unwavering self-belief. His story serves as a powerful reminder that no matter how hard the world may push against you, your worth is never defined by others' judgments. Often, those who are discarded, overlooked, or misunderstood are the ones who possess the potential to rise above the challenges that life throws at them. When Jordan was fired, many people, including his former boss, Gregory, saw it as the end of his story. To them, Jordan's struggles were proof that he didn't belong in the corporate world. But what they failed to see was his true strength, the strength to push through adversity, the will to grow, even when the odds were stacked against him, and the belief that his worth was not tied to any single failure or setback. Resilience isn't about never falling. It's about the ability to rise every time you do. Jordan's resilience shone through when he refused to let Gregory's harsh decision dictate his future. Even in the face of rejection, he chose to take control of his destiny. He understood that his circumstances didn't define his future, and that success was built not only on skill, but also on perseverance and determination. Jordan's story is a testament to the power of hard work. He worked tirelessly, not just to prove others wrong, but to prove something to himself. He realized that true success isn't about meeting the superficial standards of others. It's about knowing your own value and working relentlessly toward your goals, no matter how many people doubt you along the way. The world often measures success with shallow markers, like wealth, status, or titles, but true success lies in the growth of character, in learning from setbacks, and in the courage to keep going when the road ahead seems impossible. Jordan's success shows that superficial judgments based on appearances or first impressions can often lead to missed opportunities. Gregory's inability to look beyond Jordan's struggles prevented him from seeing the potential in the very employee he let go. This is a powerful reminder that our worth can't be measured by others' narrow viewpoints or shallow standards. Hard work, resilience, and self-belief were the cornerstones of Jordan's journey. When one door slammed in his face, he found another, and he walked through it with the same determination that had carried him through every challenge. Jordan's story proves that the road to success is rarely a straight path, and it's often the people who face the most obstacles who are the ones with the greatest potential to succeed. As we reflect on Jordan's journey, let's remember this. Sometimes the people who get overlooked are the ones who have the most to offer. It's easy to judge someone based on their current situation or appearance, but true potential lies in the unseen strength, the unspoken perseverance, and the relentless drive to overcome. The world may try to define us, but it's up to us to show that our worth is limitless. So, the next time you face a setback or feel like you're being underestimated, remember Jordan's story. Don't let the opinions of others become your reality. Keep pushing forward, because the most powerful success stories often come from the ones who were never expected to make it.